Story 1. This all began literally on my birthday and continued for about 2 months afterward. At this time, the order of protection had long expired and had not been renewed since we had gone completely no contact with my entitled aunt. This had been the case ever since she tried to submit forged documents to the courts in an attempt to get her hands on my inheritance. It still puzzles me how she didn't end up in prison over that. But I digress. It was my 18th birthday, and the party was in full swing, with everyone having a great time. The kids were playing in the backyard, and the adults were relaxing with their favorite drinks. Everyone was enjoying themselves. I had just gone into the backyard to check on the kids and was having fun playing chase when there was a sudden, loud commotion inside the house. I rushed inside to see what was going on. There stood my aunt with some guy, a sleazy lawyer in a cheap suit, demanding to see me and shouting that I was going to sign her papers and that no one would stop her this time. My mother, now in declining health, was up in my aunt's face, yelling at her to get out and never come back, telling her that she was not, and never would be, welcome here. My aunt just stood there looking smug, her entitlement on full display for everyone to see. She shouted at my mom to shut up and get out of her way. When my mom didn't, my aunt had the gall to raise her hand and slap my mother so hard that she went down. I lost it. I went into full attack mode and punched my aunt in the face as hard as I could, breaking her nose for the second time in her life, and screamed, "Get out before the cops get here." My aunt got up off the floor and, seeing the murderous look on my face, decided to leave. She rushed out with the sleazy lawyer following so fast, I swear she left a vacuum in her wake. I wasn't done, though. I followed them outside and yelled that if she ever had the courage to come back, I would make her regret it. She actually had the nerve to call the cops and try to have me arrested for defending my mother. So, once again, we had to make a trip to the courthouse to apply for a new restraining order. The judge took one look at the form and signed it without question. Having dealt with her several times over the years in other frivolous lawsuits, she lost every one of them. We were later informed that when my aunt received the restraining order, she went crazy and made several threats, prompting another visit by the cops to her house. A few days later, we received a notice that she was filing a lawsuit for assault, theft of personal money, deception, and a whole host of other made-up and imagined crimes, and was demanding the inheritance in its entirety as compensation for her pain and suffering. The case went to court 2 months later. During the proceedings, she told completely embellished tales of how we were stalking her, threatening her life, and generally making her life a living nightmare. During the proceeding, the judge asked her if she had proof of said stalking. She didn't. The judge also asked us if we could provide proof of her coming to the house and attacking my mother. We did. We had several witnesses, including a retired officer who was a longtime family friend, and we showed video proof of her driving up our driveway, getting out of the car, and literally storming to the front door. Yes, my mother had long installed security cameras around the property because things were mysteriously disappearing when left outside. Cameras were not cheap at that time and were considered a luxury item. These were big, bulky cameras that you could not miss if you saw them. My aunt also pulled the "threaten to kill her" card, pointing at me, trying to play the victim, but failed miserably. The judge asked me if that was true. I told him yes, but that it was said in anger because she had hurt my mother, and I was seeing red at the time. I ended up with a very small fine and 5 hours of community service. No big deal. I knocked all that out in one afternoon and made a few new friends at the same time. The judge threw her case out and told her that if he ever saw her in his courtroom again with something so frivolous, he would ensure that she would be the next one fined and receive no less than 100 hours of community service to teach her a little humility. He also ruled that no matter what she thinks, the terms of the inheritance were spelled out clearly, and that she had lost any and all claim to it the first time she tried to sue a 9-year-old child over it, and that the court would show her no mercy whatsoever next time. A few minutes after court was adjourned, we were in the court foyer getting ready to leave when she and the sleazy lawyer approached and said this was far from over, that if they couldn't get the inheritance due to my aunt, they would keep it tied up in legal procedures until none of it was left to inherit. She was reminded of the new restraining order, and my mother called over one of the police officers who were there with other clients. My aunt and her sleazy lawyer left in a rush. True to his word, a few days later, we got notice of a new lawsuit from them and that they had applied for a change of venue, claiming they feared they would not get a fair hearing locally because of the good old boy attitude that permeated the local populace. Their request for a change of venue was denied on the basis of insufficient proof. So, they started playing delay tactics, claiming they were still investigating certain matters and were not yet fully prepared, etc., thinking that it would cost us money and force us to just sign the inheritance over to end the troubles. It didn't work because I had not yet received the inheritance. Our attorney waited until after everything was settled before handing it over to me. Brilliant maneuver on his part. Unfortunately, my mother passed away during this time in her sleep. They tried one more time to get me to sign over the inheritance a few days after my mother's wake and funeral. All I did was walk over to the Now My phone and start dialing, saying, "Hello? Police? I have 2 trespassers on my property who have a restraining order against them and are refusing to leave." They vanished faster than I thought possible. In the end, they were forced to drop the suit as it was obvious they were not going to win. And yes, I was stubborn enough to leave it where it was for as long as it took for them to stop. Since then, my aunt has been obsessed with getting her hands on the inheritance, even going so far as to claim I was a terrible person and trying to get me kicked out of my own home by the town on that basis. No one ever believed her. The last time, she wound up being ordered into court and threatened with serious consequences if she did not cease her harassment and threats. Since then, the rest of the family has essentially cast her out, ostracizing her. Even those considered entitled want nothing to do with her anymore. Still, she persists in trying to gossip and spread rumors about me and how I stole her inheritance to anyone who will listen. No one ever believes her, yet she persists. Her entitlement and obsession have grown so powerful to her that she still thinks she's going to get her money someday and that I will pay for making her suffer so much. She has become so obsessed that she even managed to bully the one family member with whom I did share my inheritance into buying her a small house. She still wanted more but got totally cut off by that family member after she got the house. To this day, she still has not given up her attempts to get my inheritance, even trying to claim a new house I had purchased with her money, but that's another story. She can try as much as she wants, but she will never succeed. In the end, she will eventually pass away, bitter and lonely, and wind up buried in a pauper's grave, only remembered for her unbridled entitlement and obsession. Story 2. This story I'm about to share took place around 15 years ago when I was working as a firefighter investigator in an independent department. To give you some context, I was a lieutenant stationed at a large firehouse with 2 fire engines, a newer 110-foot tower ladder truck, a chief's car, and a utility truck. We had a close-knit group of firefighters, and each day, one of us was responsible for cooking. My friend Bob was the general manager of a small grocery store. In front of his store, there was a space marked "Emergency Vehicles Only," reserved for fire trucks and other emergency vehicles. This story revolves around an entitled individual who thought he could park his fancy BMW in that spot every week without facing any consequences. One day, Bob confronted this entitled individual and informed him that he couldn't park there. The response he got was far from pleasant. The individual replied, "I can park wherever I please. I make more in a day than you make in a week." Understandably, Bob was upset about this encounter, so he called me to vent his frustration. Since we were good friends, I decided to take action. I hopped into our utility truck, which had department decals on the door and a single red light on the dashboard, and parked in the emergency vehicles only spot. As I was walking into the store, I heard the entitled individual shouting, "You can't park there, it's my special spot." I turned to him and calmly explained, "Excuse me, but I'm on official duty and can park here." I pointed at the department decal on the truck door. However, he continued to be belligerent, saying, "You can't be a firefighter. You're a woman. Move your truck and leave, you," followed by an inappropriate slur. This infuriated me. I was proud of my job, and it was disheartening to encounter such a disrespectful individual. Without a word, I walked into Bob's office to get more information about the ongoing issue with this entitled person. As Bob explained the continuous parking violations and his troubles with this individual, I noticed a small notice on the fire suppression system sprinklers indicating that the inspection was coming up. An idea began forming in my head. Here's where the plan for justice unfolds. I gathered some information, left Bob's office, and headed back to the fire station. Upon arriving, I went straight to my chief's office and told him about the entitled individual and his behavior. My chief, a towering 6'6", 320-pound Samoan man who considered all of us as family, listened intently. As I explained my plan, he got a gleam in his eye and readily agreed to it. He immediately called for a station meeting where I detailed my idea. We decided to send a fire engine and the old truck to the store the next time the entitled individual parked in the fire lane. Fast forward 2 weeks. Bob called the fire station, informing us that the entitled individual had just parked in the emergency spot again. As I thanked him, I heard the fire alarm go off in the background. I knew this was our chance. I changed into my investigator uniform with turnout gear, informed my chief, and sent the trucks out. I hopped into the Quint, a type of fire apparatus, and we raced to the store. When we arrived, I spotted the entitled individual's car right in the emergency vehicle spot. I quickly radioed for one of the engines to pull up right in front of his car, while the truck parked right beside the driver's side door. As I got out of the Quint, the engineer began setting up the ladder, and one of the support struts crushed the front of the entitled individual's hood. The alarm in the store continued to blare. I went inside to find Bob evacuating the store as the alarm rang loudly. The entitled individual, realizing what was happening, came running out of the store. He spotted his car and lost his temper. I radioed the police dispatch to request officers at the store, as there was a man obstructing a fire operation. The dispatcher assured me they would send some officers to assist. 3 officers arrived, and I asked them to follow me. We approached the entitled individual, and when I shouted, "Hey, leave my firefighters alone," he turned to see me. He rushed up to me, screaming that he'd make me pay for damaging his precious baby, his car. I calmly warned him that if he didn't leave, he would be arrested. He got right in my face, saying, "You did this, I'll have your job for this." Then he pushed me back. At that moment, the officers and I acted, tackling the entitled individual to the ground and handcuffing him. After he was subdued, I informed him that he was under arrest for assault and interfering with a fire investigation, and that his car would be towed for parking in a fire lane. It was later discovered that the car had been crushed by the ladder strut. The entitled individual received 12 months of probation for assaulting me and interfering with a fire operation, as well as a $500 fine for his illegal parking, the cost of the tow, and he lost his luxury car. The moral of this story is simple: don't park where you shouldn't, or bad things will happen. In this case, it led to the entitled individual's humiliation and the loss of his car. Parking rules are in place for a reason, and everyone should follow them, regardless of their sense of entitlement. Story 3. Let me tell you about the absolute nightmare I've been living with in my apartment complex. I've got these neighbors living right above me who've been nothing but trouble since they moved in. It's a mother-daughter duo, and let me tell you, they're a real piece of work. The mother, let's call her Karen, is about 60 and a raging alcoholic. Her daughter's around 30. They're constantly at each other's throats, screaming, slamming doors, the whole 9 yards. They've even had fights in the driveway with their boyfriends. One time, one of these guys actually punched a cop in the face and got arrested. Can you believe it? But that's not even the worst of it. They leave their poor dog on the balcony to bark and howl all day. And sometimes, when Karen gets too drunk, her daughter locks her out of the apartment. Their front door is right next to my bedroom window, so I get a front row seat to all the drama. So, this one day, around 2 p.m., I start hearing the usual yelling from upstairs. I knew it was going to go one of two ways. Either they'd yell for an hour and then shut up, or the daughter would lock Karen out. Lucky me, it was option number 2. I hear the daughter dragging Karen down the stairs and then locking her out. It was pouring rain outside, but that didn't seem to bother her. Karen starts slurring and babbling incoherently outside my window. I could barely make out what she was saying, but it was something like this. Karen: well, fine then, you silly goose. I don't need your stuff anyway, you meanie. I have friends, you don't, you stupid dummy, and EIE is gonna get Urer. You no talk, you dummy. Let me in, dummy. The daughter starts throwing Karen's stuff out the window at her. Bedding, clothes, you name it. This goes on for about 2 hours before someone finally calls the cops. When the police show up, Karen starts rambling about how the government is on her side and they're gonna help her if the police won't. Police Officer 1: the government have more important things to worry about than you with COVID-19. I couldn't help but think, oh snap, that officer wasn't pulling any punches. Police Officer 1: Karen, pull your pants up. I didn't see it myself, but my neighbor across the way said it was not a pretty sight. Police Officer 1: so what's going to happen when we leave? Karen just keeps babbling incoherently. Police Officer 1: she's not doing anything illegal, and this isn't an essential problem. The daughter tries to reason with Karen. Daughter: Mom, are you going to come upstairs and go to sleep? Mom: are you going to go to sleep or what? They can't do something with ya? But Karen's not having it. There's more banging, yelling, and door slamming. The police leave around 4:13 p.m., but the drama doesn't stop there. The daughter ends up leaving Karen locked outside in the rain with just a pillow and a blanket. The yelling continues until 6 p.m. when the police come back for round 2. By this point, I've had enough. I've dealt with their noise before by blasting my own music, so I decide to give it another go. I crank up my iPod dock as loud as it'll go. It's so loud it's rattling my floor, which means it's definitely rattling theirs too. I do this for half an hour every time I hear them start to yell, and it seems to do the trick. Around 8 p.m., the police get called for a third time. This time, they finally arrest Karen and take her to the station. I was so relieved. The last time this happened, Karen was locked out from 10 p.m. until 2 in the morning. I didn't get any sleep that night, so I was over the moon that she was taken away this time. Living with neighbors like this is a real pain, but I've got to admit, they make for some pretty wild stories. I've learned to cope by recording some of their antics on my phone and blasting music when things get too crazy. It's not ideal, but hey, you've got to find the humor in these situations, right? I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that they'll either shape up or ship out soon. Until then, I guess I'll keep my music ready and my phone charged for the next installment of the Karen and Daughter Show. Who needs Netflix when you've got neighbors like these, right? Story 4. Alright, let me tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me last Friday. So, I've got this little routine. Every Friday, I meet up with my supplier to get some weed. Nothing major, just a bit to help me unwind after a long week. So there I am, at our usual spot. I meet my guy, we do our thing, and I'm heading back to my motorcycle. I'm feeling pretty good, looking forward to a chill weekend. That's when this dude comes out of nowhere and starts asking me about my bike. Random guy: hey, nice ride. What model is that? Me: thanks, it's a insert motorcycle model. I'm thinking, okay, just another bike enthusiast. But then he does something weird. He puts his coffee cup right on my bike. Who does that? Me. Could you please take your cup off my bike? Random guy: hold on a second, I need to talk to you about something. At this point, I'm getting a bit annoyed. I just want to get home, Random guy: I just witnessed a drug deal. You don't happen to have some on you, do you? My heart starts racing. How did he see that? I try to play it cool. Me: nah, man, I don't know what you're talking about. I try to sit down on my bike, ready to get the hell out of there, But this guy isn't letting up. Random guy, listen, if you don't give up your stash, I'm calling the cops. Now I'm in a real pickle. I start thinking about the risks. Is this little bit of weed worth losing my job over? Getting slapped with a big fine? After a moment, I decide it's not worth it. Me, fine, here. I hand over my stash, feeling pretty pissed off. This guy's basically blackmailing me, and there's nothing I can do about it. Or so I thought. As soon as I hand over the goods, the guy starts walking away. He's got this smug look on his face like he just pulled off the heist of the century. But here's where it gets good. Not even 15 seconds later, a police officer walks around the corner. It's like the universe decided to throw me a bone. I don't even hesitate. I walk right up to the officer. Me, officer, I just saw that guy smoking a joint. The cop looks at me, then at the guy who's still walking away. Officer, thanks for the tip, sir. The officer walks up to the guy, who's now looking pretty nervous. Officer, excuse me, sir. I'm going to need you to empty your pockets. You should have seen this guy's face. He went from smug to terrified in about half a second. He starts stammering, trying to come up with some excuse, but it's too late. The officer finds my weed, and next thing you know, they're slapping the cuffs on him. As they're leading him away, I can't help but feel a little satisfied. I mean, yeah, I lost my weed, but watching this entitled jerk get his comeuppance, that was priceless. Officer, thank you for your assistance, sir. Have a good day. Me, no problem, officer. Happy to help. As I'm riding home, I can't help but laugh. This guy thought he was so clever, threatening me and taking my stash. But in the end, he's the one who ended up in the back of a police car. I guess sometimes karma really is a bitch. I learned my lesson, though. From now on, I'm going to be a lot more careful about where and when I pick up. But man, I'll never forget the look on that guy's face when the cop showed up. Sometimes, life has a funny way of working out. Story 5. It all started with my neighbor, who we'll call John. He's a big guy, ex-military and muscular, but surprisingly level-headed. About 8 years ago, John decided he wanted to add a second story to his house. Seems simple enough, right? Well, not so fast. See, there was this ancient legal binding on the property over 100 years old that said no renovations could happen unless all surrounding neighbors agreed. Everyone was cool with it, except for one guy. Let's call him Alex. This Alex was a real piece of work. For 8 long years, John would politely write to Alex twice a year, asking him to lift the ban. And every single time, Alex would come up with some ridiculous excuse. John, hey Alex, I was hoping you might reconsider allowing me to renovate my house. Alex, absolutely not. It would be an eyesore. Mind you, every other house on our street has 2 stories except John's. The next time. John, Alex, I've drawn up some new plans. Would you take a look? Alex, no way. It would ruin the aesthetic of the street. This coming from a guy who blasted music past midnight regularly. The hypocrisy was astounding. This went on for 8 years. 8 years. Then one day, we heard Alex was selling his house. That's when John's eyes lit up with an idea. John went out and bought one of those professional metal signs people put up when they're selling a house. But instead of putting it on Alex's property, he put it right on the edge of his own, next to Alex's house. The sign read, 5 new apartments being built. Get in quick, 2 sold already. 3 entire stories, loud noise expected for a year. He even had it translated into Mandarin and Arabic. The phone number on the sign, disconnected, of course. Alex was set to auction his house in a month, and he quickly got a lawyer involved, trying to make John take down the sign. John's response, he wrote about 60 letters to the lawyer. Each letter cost Alex about $50 for the lawyer to read and give advice. Eventually, the lawyer told John to take down the sign a week before the auction, or they'd go to court. John complied. Sort of. He took down the sign a week before the auction. But on auction day, oh boy. First, John parked his 4 cars along the front of Alex's house, blocking the auction here sign and taking up all the parking spots. Then, he cranked up his house's built-in speaker system, blasting construction sound effects and music. He put the original sign back up, plus a new one that said, "House Demolition Furniture Sale." To sell the illusion, John dragged most of his furniture out onto his lawn. When people came to buy stuff, he'd quote them outrageous prices. He didn't actually want to sell anything, it was all about making the apartment construction seem real. During the auction, we could barely hear the auctioneer over John's racket. Alex came over, fuming. "Alex, what the hell are you doing? Turn that noise off." "John, sorry, can't do that. I've got the builders on a contract. Don't want to reschedule, you know how it is." The house was supposed to go for $3 million, but it only sold for $2.4 million. Alex was livid. He called John later, practically spitting fire. "Alex, you owe me $600,000. I had to halt construction on my new house because of you." "John, actually, you should be thanking me. I saved the new owners $600,000. See, John had already talked to the new owners and explained the situation. They agreed to lift the renovation ban. In the end, John got his renovation, Alex lost a chunk of change, and the rest of us got to witness some world-class petty revenge. Sometimes, karma takes 8 years, but when it hits hard. Story 6. This family member's spouse was involved in an accident that left them critically injured. They were in intensive care for months and would have faced permanent disability upon returning home. They didn't want to leave their home, which was close to the best hospital in the region and was meant to be their forever home. So, plans were made to renovate it for accessibility. In addition to the renovations, a wheelchair van and other medical equipment for home use were also needed. As she worked on all of this, it became clear that large expenditures would be necessary, and it would take time to draw money out of long-term savings and retirement accounts. So, she contacted the credit card companies to increase their credit limits. Sadly, before the renovations were complete, her spouse passed away after almost 6 months of hospitalization and therapy. Now, the focus turned to final arrangements. The couple had always been very frugal and maintained nearly perfect credit. All their cards were being paid on time, and despite carrying a balance on some cards from the ongoing construction, demolition had already started, so renovations had to continue. But at a slower pace, money was now coming in from those long-term savings. The problem arose when one major credit card company refused to cooperate with her. She tried to access the account and was told, "Sorry, I have to speak to the account holder." She explained that her spouse had passed away and that she wanted to pay off the remaining balance on the card. She also explained that she was an account holder. However, the bank insisted that she was not on the account, merely a card holder, and had no rights to access the account. The representative on the phone told her that her husband had opened the account without her and had just given her a card, claiming she just didn't understand how credit cards worked. This was completely untrue. The couple had always been joint account holders on everything since they first got married for exactly this reason. They had done extensive estate planning and ensured that all their assets were protected in trusts in case the worst happened. They knew their kids would be cared for, and their partner would have access to everything. Additionally, she had run the couple's business for over a decade, navigating through regulations, insurance billing, payroll, finances, and taxes. Needless to say, she did not appreciate being condescended to. Unfortunately, the bank wouldn't budge. They wouldn't allow her access to the account for any reason. But for some reason, they didn't cancel the card after learning that the sole account holder had passed away. This back and forth went on for weeks, with multiple calls to the bank, trying to escalate the issue to supervisors in hopes of resolving the account's status. In a final attempt to show the bank that they were only hurting themselves, she asked, "So, I'm unable to access any part of the account, even to make a payment." Bank, "That's right. So, the account is going to be closed." Bank, "No, only the account holder can do that. Even though the account holder is deceased." Bank, Only the account holder, ma'am. So, what does that mean for cardholders and their ability to charge on the account? Bank. Only the account holder can deactivate a card or modify the account. So, what happens if a cardholder uses their card? Bank. They can continue to use the card until the account holder tells us otherwise. The deceased account holder? Bank. Yes. I can't help you with anything else. You need to put the account holder on the phone if you want to change anything or make a payment. No, that's fine. She broke down crying immediately after but decided that since they set the rules, she would play by them. All the final expenses, medical bills, and as much of the construction cost as possible were put onto that credit card. She maxed it out and then let it sit until the credit card company started calling for payment. I'm sorry, per your policy, I'm just a cardholder, and I'm not responsible for any balance. Ma'am, this balance needs to be paid, or it will affect your credit. It better not. I'm not on the account. This is an illegal collections call, and I will be reporting it to the Federal Trade Commission and the Attorneys General in your home state and mine. I still have his number on speed dial. You can make your case to the court. She was used to getting medical insurance companies to pay claims for the last decade or so. They really didn't want to play hardball with her. Remember how all the assets were in trusts? On paper, her partner had no assets to place a lien on. All the cash in the joint checking account had been used to pay expenses for the last several months, and withdrawals from long-term savings were sent to her account, not the joint account. They had agreed to move all exposed assets shortly after her partner regained consciousness, fearing the worst. Plus, all the income from the business had been brought home in her name for more than a decade, so she would actually receive some Social Security benefits when she got older. So not only did his estate have no assets to pursue, but he also didn't have an income for the last decade. The bank was left with a maxed-out credit card and no assets in the estate to file against for payment. The handful of other credit card companies worked with her to raise limits temporarily or remove daily spending caps for large expenditures, and they were all paid without a single missed, late, or partial payment. But the bank had to absorb a 5-figure loss all because they decided that the wife didn't deserve to be on the account from day one. She had every intention of paying every bill and expense. She had never been one to try to scam or cheat anyone. She gave the bank every chance to accept payment for the bill. They repeatedly refused to acknowledge her as a spouse or executor, but she certainly enjoyed the irony of the only company that refused to acknowledge the death of her spouse ended up paying for the funeral expenses. Story 7. This story takes place when I was 19 years old, and I had my first run-in with a Karen at work. Just a heads up, I have mild autism, so if my story's a bit off, I apologize in advance. Now, let's get into it. It was a typical afternoon at work, at a store that rhymes with waif day. The place was packed, and I was up front, bagging items for customers. I've always enjoyed making people laugh with corny jokes and prop comedy while working. On this particular day, I was bagging alongside manager when she appeared. Karen had the classic Karen look: dyed blonde hair, fake nails, the works. She had a son with her, who was about 15, and seemed like a normal, polite kid. As she approached the register, manager greeted her and asked how her day was going. Karen responded in a snooty, spoiled tone, like something straight out of a movie. Meanwhile, her son was fake smiling, clearly trying not to die of embarrassment. Karen had a huge load of items, almost 3 carts full. As I was bagging, things started getting overwhelming, and the son offered to help. I thought, at least the kid's more considerate than his mom, but Karen yanked him back. The following conversation ensued. Awesome, son. Oh, Mom. Karen. Don't help. Let them do it themselves. She sounded demanding and serious. Manager. What the heck? Me. Rising anger, level 1. Manager. He was just trying to help. Karen. No, he needs to learn not to be lazy. She says this, pointing at me. Me. Rising anger, level 2. Right then, Lucky, my best friend, walked by and noticed my rising anger. He patted me on the back, basically signaling, "I'm here in case anything happens." What felt like hours later, we finally finished bagging all of Kay's stuff. The total price was way more than my usual paycheck. Karen handed manager a huge stack of coupons. Manager started scanning them, but they were all coming back as invalid. When she informed Karen of this, Karen went off, yelling and screeching about terrible customer service. Awesome Son tried to step in, saying he knew the coupons wouldn't work, but Karen screamed at him to keep quiet. At that moment, both manager and I realized something was fishy. Manager checked the coupons and noticed they were expired, but the dates had somehow been altered. They were all off by a year. Manager explained that the coupons were forged. Karen responded by yelling even louder, accusing us of being liars. Then she pointed at me and yelled, as loud as day, "And that insert slur against disabled people is the store's biggest problem." The entire store went dead silent. My anger was skyrocketing. Manager, Lucky, and everyone else around were shocked that this waste of air had called me that. Awesome Son was dying of embarrassment. Then manager told Karen to leave. "Karen, I want to see the manager." "Manager, I am the manager, and I'm asking you to leave or I'm calling the cops." "Karen, you and that another slur towards disabled people will be sued." Me, anger over 9,000. Lucky, "Please, tell everyone what you're suing Mangle and manager for." Lucky said this in a smug tone. Me, waiting to pull the anger trigger. Karen looks around at everyone staring at her. Lucky, "Because I believe we have everything on camera with audio and hundreds of witnesses who would say otherwise. So it's in your best interest to scram and never come back. Oregon, we can show the cops the evidence of fraud and forgery you tried to scam us with, and you could be in jail for a long time. So, what's it gonna be?" Karen went ghost white and bolted out of the store, leaving Awesome Son behind. Awesome Son apologized profusely for his mom's behavior. We all heard tires screeching as Karen sped out of the parking lot. We had to call Awesome Son's dad to pick him up. Manager told me to clock out for the day to recover from the experience and gave me the next day off as well. Last I heard, Karen was put on a watch list and was permanently banned from the store.